Mankind is influencing the global climate through carbon dioxide released from the burning of fossil fuels. That's the message that scientist James Black delivered in 1971 to the executives at Standard Oil, today known as Exxon, one of the largest fossil fuel polluters in the world. Yep, the fossil fuel industry was warned about the destruction they were causing to our climate. They knew it back then, and they know it now. But have they slowed down their multi-trillion-dollar quest to destroy and pollute our one and only home? Of course not. Instead, we're now seeing the consequences of their inaction play out in real time. Extreme weather, floods and fires are destroying ecosystems, ruining communities and costing lives. The momentum and pressure to hold these climate wreckers accountable has never been more urgent. But the fossil fuel industry has a plan to keep making killer profits in spite of all this bad press. Corporate greenwashing, and a lot of it. To be green, recycled. Yeah, 95% recycled plastic bags. Beige, earthy tones. Us consumers have become increasingly aware of the environmental impact of the products that we buy and use, and brands have capitalized on that sentiment to sell more of their stuff. An awful lot of products that really shouldn't boast about their clean and green environmental credentials, with words such as carbon neutral and eco-friendly. They're trying to sell you a vision of sustainability, but more and more often, that vision is a lie. And that lie is called greenwashing.
We sometimes focus on the consumer products that we might buy at the supermarket, but the billion-ton elephant in the room is fossil fuel greenwashing. And the clearest example of that is when companies like a Woodside or a Chevron or a Santos tell us that they are helping to fix the climate crisis at the same time as they are racing to dig up and sell more of the coal, oil and gas that is fueling harmful climate change. Fossil fuel greenwashing is rampant in Australia. We see it when big fossil fuel corporations are talking to government and trying to convince them not to get involved in more regulation that would genuinely stop new fossil fuel expansion. It's not just advertising for consumer products that we should be worried about. It's any time a big fossil fuel company looks us, the community, or a decision maker in the eye and tells us they've got a plan for tackling climate change when we simply know that's not the case.
You don't have to look very far to find some truly gobsmacking examples of this going on across the board. Let's take a closer look at one of them. Woodside Petroleum is Australia's homegrown gas Goliath. It's a company that's pumped out more than 47 million tonnes of harmful carbon pollution into the atmosphere since 2016. Woodside claims it's working to cut its emissions this decade and achieve net zero by 2050. But at the same time, the company is pursuing multiple massive new fossil fuel projects, like the Scarborough and Browse gas stations off Western Australia, both of which are new carbon bombs that will add billions of tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions to the environment in the coming years. Again, you can't claim net zero emissions while still continuing to invest in fossil fuels. That's greenwashing.
Fossil fuel companies usually use very vague terms to discuss their green goals and their green aspirations, and that means that they can't be challenged legally, but it still gives consumers the impression that the companies are doing the right thing. People make their decisions very quickly when they see ads or when they see social media posts or a website, and if that has pictures of a forest or a logo that looks like a leaf, people automatically assume that that company has some sort of environmental benefit, and that is absolutely not the case when we're talking about fossil fuels.
Claims like these are everywhere. They're on billboards, in our social media feeds, on TV, on the radio,
natural gases,
on the back of sports jerseys and at festivals.
Greenwashing takes many forms. In its purest form, it's just overstating a green benefit. But it can also include things such as green rinsing, when you use environmental imagery to give the impression that you're an environmentally friendly company. The halo effect is like a psychological trick. Companies like Woodside are using our love for our Australian way of life and the love for our sports as a way to maintain their polluting business models. These companies that do a lot of damage are trying to get us to associate them with something that we really value and like. It's a very subtle trick, but it's also very effective. It's been used by tobacco, it's been used by alcohol, it's used by gambling. So a fossil fuel company making a green claim is the same as Philip Morris saying that cigarettes or parts of cigarettes are good for you. It shouldn't be allowed. So consumers know what they're getting and are not being lied to.
These companies spend a fortune on marketing these claims. And until now, there's been almost no scrutiny over how producers can honestly say they are working to cut emissions, while also racing to extract even more harmful fossil fuels. Greg Bourne is someone who knows a lot about fossil fuels. That's because he was actually the boss of one.
Formerly, I was regional president of BP Australasia. So I've been around the fossil fuel, climate change, energy business for a very, very long time. Always driving in these last 30 years for the embracing of a future which is different completely from where we were in the past. Because certainly from what I see, the fossil fuel companies are going to be lobbying to hold on to the past. They're not going to be lobbying to embrace the future. The words massive profits, together with, and we're working for sustainability, it's cognitive dissonance. It does not make sense, and everyone knows it doesn't make sense. I think the companies have come back to where they really are. They're oil and gas companies. They will always be fossil fuel companies. They're not really pivoting. You see the companies like Woodside and others basically talking up a good game, particularly the gas companies, but in actual fact, all they're doing is contributing continuously to the problem of adding more fossil fuels to our environment.
And they're not alone. 10 of Australia's biggest fossil fuel corporations have all publicly committed to some form of net zero target. At the same time, every single one of them is developing new and expanded fossil fuel projects, which means their emissions are actually going up and not down. To keep making a quick buck while the planet burns, fossil fuel corporations are coming up with increasingly creative ways to cover up the true extent of the damage they are causing to our health, safety, and environment. So they buy offsets, the idea that planting a bunch of trees over here will somehow cancel out the billions of tons of emissions they're spewing out over here. And if that sounds like it doesn't add up, it's because it doesn't.
Those offsets have been talked about for roughly 30 years, and they have always been suspect. When you actually then look at, take a company like a Woodside, for example, in northwest Western Australia, saying we are going to do offsets. They're looking at doing offsets on the smallest part of the emissions that they produce, not the massive emissions that are going on in Japan, Korea, China, where the products are sold. So it looks good, doesn't it, on paper? Oh, we're doing offsets, we're planting some trees. Doesn't it look nice? But in actual fact, playing around with the numbers to make it look good.
I've said it before, and you bet I'll say it again. Fossil fuel companies who claim to be reducing emissions while still actively investing in new fossil fuel projects and purchasing loads of dodgy offsets are greenwashing.
The science is really clear. To have any chance of holding global warming to 1.5 degrees and keeping our climate as safe as possible, fossil fuels have to stay in the ground. Renewable energy has to scale up quickly and take its place. Not in 30 years or 50 years, right now.
If coal, oil, and gas corporations are allowed to continue greenwashing, they're actively hurting our shared efforts to reduce emissions and putting our safe, livable future further and further out of reach. And right now, they're getting away with it. The Australian government has launched an inquiry looking into systematic greenwashing in Australia. This is excellent news. At the Climate Council, we've fed into this inquiry with a submission.
Climate Council is calling on the Australian government to crack down on fossil fuel greenwashing. We can't have a situation where big fossil fuel companies are lying right to our faces about the role they're playing in harmful climate change.
This is what we're contending with in Australia in the 2020s. Mega fires that blaze so hot they create tornadoes. Floods that demolish entire cities. Storms and sea level rise wiping out our coastlines. A reef on the brink. Climate refugees in our own country. Lives and hearts broken.
12 councils around Australia have now voted to ban fossil fuel advertising and sponsorships on their land. And what we're really seeing is the community moving to get this damaging marketing away from their streets, away from their community property, away from their sports fields. It's a really positive movement, and we do believe that legislation banning fossil fuel advertising or restricting fossil fuel advertising is really what's required.
Fossil fuel corporations aren't interested in listening to the people who are living through the crisis they've created. They're not interested in listening to scientists, and they're certainly not interested in impacting their bottom line for something as trivial as, a livable future. So it's time for a big stick. Let's force them to stop the bullshit. Australia needs laws that will strip them of their marketing spin and put an end to the greenwashing nonsense, so they can be exposed for what they truly are: climate wreckers, profiteers, and responsibility dodgers. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about what the Climate Council is calling for, you can read our full submission to the Australian Senate inquiry into greenwashing at the link down below. And while you're there, chuck us a like and a subscribe, and maybe even share this video with a mate. The Climate Council is Australia's only fully independent, people-powered climate science organisation, and your support means the world to us.